Speaking of content moderation, Lydia had sent us a tweet earlier today. She actually, for everyone watching and listening, she actually had to jump off internet issues, but she should be back with us on Thursday, no problem. But she sent this to the group, and I wanted to bring it up since we were talking about content moderators in terms of Twitter in Silicon Valley. But this tweet from POTUS, I want to read it off. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, folks who purchase electric vehicles can receive a tax credit of up to $7,500 per vehicle, allowing millions of consumers to ditch the pump and easily switch to an EV. And what's funny is right under this, Twitter put a content claim on it, or a fact check. I'm not sure exactly what to call it, but it says the $7,500 tax credit existed prior to the Inflation Reduction Act. I just think it's so funny that POTUS, the White House, the people that run their social media would love to take credit for everything. And then Twitter comes in here and says, nope, you don't get to take credit for it.
Well, he's a politician, and I hate saying that because we have a politician on here, and Nick is I mean, here's the thing. Honestly, this is another thing. At some point, we need to do an episode where we actually go into, like,
you need to start keeping a running list of all these episode ideas.
I know. Why am I sitting at this table? Because, like, other than Tina, I've known Nick longer than anybody here. So like, not to like rag on Nick, because Nick honestly has, I can tell you firsthand, like, Nick has never taken credit for something that he can't legitimately take credit for.
He does not.
Even when it would be in his own self-interest as an elected official to do so. And let me tell you, like the way that DC works and the way that most state legislatures work, like, oh, you better believe that Joe Biden's consultants were probably telling him, of course you need to rag on this and you know, take credit for this. Just like he needs to take credit for apparently destroying inflation, despite the fact that A, inflation is not actually completely gone, and B, he hasn't done anything to stop inflation. In fact, arguably, he has done things to make inflation worse. So, I'm not surprised that he's done this. B, I'm definitely not surprised that Twitter is starting to fact check everybody now because to go back to Democrats have made it like very publicly known that they hate Elon Musk. Mm-hmm. And notice how, like, every time that Joe Biden would do something like touting electric cars and stuff like that, he would conveniently leave the largest electric car manufacturer on earth off the table.
It's almost, at one point on that, it's almost as if the Inflation Reduction Act or whatever bill was passed to give the $7,500 tax credit, the limitations within it were almost designed to exclude Tesla.
Did you know that Tesla just started dropping their prices?
I'm furious.
Actually, you probably did notice because Hamilton bought one right before they lowered the price.
Well, I don't get to take.
Nick, what's your take on this?
I think from the content moderation, here was the interesting thing about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and everything else out there, YouTube. I think the left, there's this arrogant statement that I heard once that, well, the reason why the media and everyone agrees with us is because reality has a liberal bias. Like, no, it's not reality. You just have a lot of institutions with liberal bias. And that was like evident to anybody that would actually read beyond the headlines. Well, now all of a sudden there's a couple of networks out there, Twitter now being one of them, where it's not like they stopped fact checking everybody. They just started fact checking the other side. And this happens every single time the left gets subjected to their own rules. They immediately start to cry foul, right? They don't want to be treated equal. They want preferential treatment because they think they're better. Well, the moment all of a sudden someone comes and goes, well, actually, you know, this thing that you're talking about that supposedly lowered inflation, which by the way, can we just say this right now? Whether you like that, whether you don't like that, whether it was before the Inflation Reduction Act, whether it was after, doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with lowering inflation. Nothing. In fact, quite the opposite, because essentially it's a government tax credit, right? So it has nothing to do with lowering inflation. But now somebody actually came out and said, well, wait a second. Like, the most obvious blunder here is, well, that happened before the Inflation Reduction Act. How can you give it credit to the Inflation Reduction Act? And then the left gets mad. Like, well, how dare you? Don't you want to save the planet? Like, I am telling you, Christian nailed it with respect to, in politics, you take credit for whatever is going on, regardless of whether or not you did anything about it. And you always blame the other side for what is going on, regardless of whether or not they had anything to do with it. Like, politics is one big causation versus correlation fallacy in order to try to grasp at taking credit for whatever you can, and then doing your level best to make sure that people never understand what is actually going on in order to create the sort of circumstances that they're living through.
Yeah.
And it's just so damn frustrating. And I don't like it when the left does it, and I don't like it when the right does it. I mean, what all this, the reason why we talk about inflation so much right now, and the reason why we have trashed Republicans, is because that is one element where both sides have been guilty because politicians want to take credit for things, and they want to do it without being obvious about what's going on.
It's a Republican that took us off the gold standard.
It is, and this is the point, is when people talk about the uni party, or when they talk about the idea that it's not, you know, this or that, it's us against, it's them against us. The thing that we've always wanted this podcast to do was to make sure that regardless of what you feel about a particular situation, we're honest with you about what we believe, why we believe it, and we actually present logical and empirical evidence to justify our position. So that the bottom line is that if conservatives or people that say they're conservatives start doing the things that we've told you are responsible for the pain that you're feeling, you will know that they're doing it. Because like we absolutely believe that there's such a thing as objective truth out there. And the more you understand about how things work and why they work and what the results are, the more we can move away from these BS causation correlation fallacies and actually truly understand why one thing is leading to another, the better off we're going to be, regardless of what political affiliation you slap on it. And so, yeah, I'm glad that the content moderators are actually starting to come out. Now, I don't even really like them, but I'm glad that they're at least, you know, saying, hey, this is intellectually dishonest or inconsistent. Well, but in reality, there's no substitute for it, because even though we might be happy that Twitter is doing this now, if you're reliant on Twitter to do it, you're going to be really, really disappointed. It's more about having just and the beautiful part about it is that it isn't super complex. A lot of it is, but what we talk about here, and I always like to tell people, look, I don't claim to be brilliant. I don't claim to have some sort of special insight. But when you can view these things through just basic logic and have an understanding of cause and effect, all of a sudden, a lot of the stuff that politicians try to throw out there to confuse the situation in order to protect themselves becomes easily identifiable. And that's the whole point. If people get nothing else from this, regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum, I genuinely hope they come away with a better understanding of how things work, not so they can advance a particular political party, but so that they can have a better understanding of how this works in reality and do the things that are actually going to cause us to be more prosperous, more free, more independent from some sort of government entity that wants to micromanage or control us.
Christian, what's your final point to be made in this show today?
We're doomed. No.
That's always Christian's final point.
No, my final point is lots of politicians are going out there and they're going to start taking credit for supposedly ushering us through this inflation crisis when it's not over. It's absolutely not over, because the same people, this is actually something that we have not brought up so far this episode, the same people that are currently taking credit for apparently solving inflation are, first off, the same people that helped cause the problem in the first place, but more importantly, are currently the same people that are putting immense pressure on the Federal Reserve to reverse course and return us back to cutting interest rates and printing money, which will bring inflation back stronger than ever before. So I find it really laughable that somebody like Joe Biden, or really anybody in the in the federal legislature, in the U.S. Senate and House, are going out there and they're taking credit for apparently clamping down on inflation at the same time that they are passing trillion-dollar omnibus bills that are going to really drive inflation through the roof if the Federal Reserve is ever going to be forced to cut interest rates, which they probably will sooner than later. I have a feeling that if not this year, then next year, the Fed will start cutting interest rates. And when that happens, and unless inflation has been quenched by then, it will be coming back.
Yeah, start all over again.
I was just thinking for a moment what I wanted my final point of this short show to be today, and I just remembered that I was editing a clip earlier for Nick to post on Instagram, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we can only rely so much on politicians, and we have to ultimately rely on ourselves for food, for our freedom, education. And I just want to play this clip if Christian and Nick don't mind. Nick, I know you can't see the clip, but it was from your speech at the Food Freedom Night up but about an hour above Culpeper. And I just want to play it real quick. It's 45 seconds, and I want to get your reaction.
At the end of the day, you're the only one that can decide whether or not you're going to be free. You can elect people that believe that you're free and believe that you deserve to remain so, and will fight for it in the legislature. But ultimately, if your freedom is completely dependent upon whether or not I convince a majority of my colleagues to protect that freedom, you aren't. Don't tell me what you're willing to fight for. Tell me what you're willing to sacrifice for. Because that tells me what you really love, what you really care about, and what you're really willing to risk something for. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to risk in order to live your life in accordance with your values? And quite frankly, I think it's been a while since Americans have been faced with that decision. But there's a lot of people a little bit further down the road all over the world that are finding out that if you're not willing to take a stand on the little things, you aren't going to have the resources, the capability, or the grit to do it when it's the big things.